China sends humanitarian aid to Gaza and expressed its wish for continued dialogue and international cooperation. That is one of the main news right now. Also, the Cuban government announced that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, allocated more than $120 million to destabilize the island. And also among the headlines, the Russian government expressed Wednesday its interest in creating conditions for negotiating stable relations with the United States. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Beren de los Santos and from the headquarters in Havana, Cuba, we begin with the news. Now we begin with the information. China sent humanitarian aid to Gaza and expressed its wish for continued dialogue and international cooperation to solve the conflict with Israel. According to Chinese authorities, the aid includes at least 60,000 emergency packages, 12,000 of which are of food, which will be delivered to the World Food Program, the Palestinian Red Crescent, and other organizations within the reach of Gaza. The Secretary General of the Hashemi charity organization, Hussein Shbili, expressed his gratitude for the support and gratitude towards Gaza and its inhabitants. On the other hand, the spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Wo Jiankun, pointed out that Beijing's priority is to support Gaza in the face of the humanitarian crisis, but also to ensure that the parties involved reach an agreement. Also in this context, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi advocated at the UN Security Council the Palestinians' right to rule over their own country and considered it a basic principle to be upheld in any post-conflict scenario.
The situation in the Middle East remains tense and fragile. Gaza and the West Bank are the homeland of the Palestinian people, not a bargaining chip in political trade-offs. Palestinians governing Palestine is an important principle that must be followed in the post-conflict governance of Gaza. It is vital to uphold the two-state solution, press for a comprehensive, just and lasting settlement of the Palestinian question and bring lasting peace and security to the Middle East.
Now we continue in Palestine as Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinians in Rafah in southern Gaza on Tuesday in another violation of the ceasefire agreement. Medical officials confirmed that 2 bodies were taken to a nearby hospital after the Israeli tank attack. In this sense, the Israeli army tried to justify the killings by claiming that it had opened fire on a number of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who were approaching its forces. The attack highlights the Israeli regime's continued disregard for the ceasefire agreement reached with the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas. And the continuing siege of the occupied West Bank by Israeli troops and settlers has generated a humanitarian crisis that has resulted in massive displacement in the territory. Experts have noted that Israel's tactics in the West Bank have become almost indistinguishable from those in the Gaza Strip, ransacking homes and expelling residents using ruthless intimidation. In recent weeks, Zionist forces advanced into towns such as Tulkarem, Farah and Nur Shams, separating families and awakening bitter memories of the war for the creation of Israel in 1948. According to figures published by several NGOs, Israel's military operations in the occupied West Bank have displaced at least 45,000 Palestinians, the largest number since the Middle East War of 1967. And the Emir of Qatar arrived in Iran and was welcomed at Tehran's Mervat airport as part of his official visit to strengthen historical ties. The Qatari Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, held a meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and other senior Iranian officials to strengthen bilateral relations. The topics discussed included politics, the economy, regional issues, with a focus on Palestine, as well as the situation in Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. Qatar had expressed its willingness to mediate between Tehran and Washington following statements by U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who said that Trump would talk to Iran if it suspended its nuclear program. Also in Japan on Wednesday, Rikyo Kimura, the perpetrator of the 2023 attack on former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Wakayama court sentenced Kimura to 5 charges, including attempted murder and violation of the explosive control law. Defense lawyers argued that the defendant's intention was not to kill the former prime minister, but to injure him. However, the prosecution demanded 15 years in prison because an explosive test conducted a month earlier showed that the manufactured weapon had the capacity to kill. The attack on the former minister, from which he escaped unharmed, took place on April 15, 2023, at the port of Wakayama City, where Kishida's speech was scheduled to take place, and hundreds of people were waiting to hear him. And the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, made his 5th visit to Japan to monitor the land contaminated by the Fukushima disaster and to visit the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant. Grossi expected a storage facility for contaminated soil from the 2011 disaster, while the Japanese government is debating how to dispose of it. The head of the IAEA will also visit the plant known as KK, with a capacity of more than 8,000 megawatts, which has been inoperative since the nuclear shutdown ordered by the Japanese authorities after the atomic disaster. Grossi's visit comes on the same day that Japan approved its new energy plan for the next 5 years. We move now to other topics. Vietnam's parliament has approved a multi-billion-dollar rail project that will boost trade by linking the country's main northern port to the Chinese border. The $8 billion project won the support of 95% of lawmakers in the National Assembly. The railway will pass through some of Vietnam's manufacturing hubs, where global factories such as Samsung, Foxconn, and Pegatron operate and rely on component supplies from China. The voyage will travel 390 kilometers from the port of Haiphong to the mountainous city of Lao Cai in China's Yunnan province and into the capital, city of Hanoi. It should be noted that a large part of the link will be financed by loans granted by the Asian giant. And in other news, more than 10,000 people have been displaced by the armed conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and have sought refuge in Burundi. The Burundian authorities reported that searches were being carried out in homes and hotels to ensure that Congolese were in possession of the necessary documents to stay in the country. They also expressed concern about the border between the two countries due to the displacement of people in the midst of the conflict in Goma and Bukavu, and warned of the possibility of the conflict in the DRC spilling over into their country. On the other hand, the authorities pointed to Rwanda as a factor of regional instability. Also in this context, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reported that the M23 rebel group in DRC killed 3 children for carrying weapons and clothes abandoned by the army. The organization also expressed its concern for journalists, human rights defenders, and members of the civil society organizations who seek protection from retaliation by M23 rebels. On the other hand, maritime traffic returned to Lake Kivu after the reopening of the port of the cities of Goma and Bukavu, which, according to the UN, could facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid into the country after weeks of fighting and looting. Now we have a short break coming up, but first, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. We continue with more information. The Cuban government announced that the United States Agency for International Development, the USAID, allocated more than $120 million to destabilize the island. According to Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez, the government of the United States has financially backed multiple initiatives that seek to destroy the Cuban Revolution. The island's top diplomat also rejected the pressures to undermine the nation's economy promoted by Washington. In other news, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, denounced that there are various groups of drug traffickers and smugglers who intend to make an attempt on his life. The Colombian president made the statements during the ceremony of transfer of command of the new Director General of the National Police at the Francisco de Paula Santander Cadet School. The president also assured that they know the identity of those who would be behind the alleged attack and expressed his concern for their safety, for which reason he entrusted the new general with the task of dismantling the illegal networks and confronting them. This is not the first time that the Colombian president announces an attempt on his life. And Panamanian students staged a new protest on the Transantine Highway in front of the University of Panama, denouncing the violation of university autonomy by the National Police. The meeting defended university autonomy, the right to protest, and the defense of solidarity pensions. The mobilization took place after the police repressed a protest of students of the university, beating them, throwing gas at them, and throwing firebombs inside the university. After what happened, 2 students were apprehended by police agents. Cases were opened against them, and they have precautionary measures of periodic notification, as well as a prohibition to leave the country. And the 48th meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, opens on Wednesday in Barbados. The Caribbean heads of state will meet for 3 days to discuss various issues such as food and nutritional security, climate change, and the current challenges in Haiti, among other topics of interest. The meeting will be led by the president of the bloc and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, and CARICOM Secretary General Carla Bernet. The meeting was convened under the theme Strength in Unity, Forging Caribbean Resilience, Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Development. And more on migration in Latin America and the Caribbean, as the Dominican Republic announced that it will extend the wall it is building on the border with Haiti by 10 to 12 kilometers. The decision responds to a request from ranchers in the border area of Tachavon in the north of the country, this according to Dominican President Luis Abinader. The country began building the barrier in 2021, claiming protection from irregular immigration, violence, and smuggling from Haiti. Construction of the wall, which will extend over half of the 340-kilometer border shared by the 2 countries, has already advanced to 80% in a first phase. It is important to note that since October, the Dominican government has implemented a large-scale deportation plans for Haitians in irregular migratory situations. Now we have a second short break coming up, but before, we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English. There you will be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Russian government expressed on Wednesday its interest in creating conditions for negotiating stable relations with the United States. According to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, his government expects to establish conditions for talks to address issues on Russian-U.S. security and strategic stability. Lavrov said that during the dialogue held in Saudi Arabia, the Trump administration showed interest in removing the obstacles to the restoration of relations and moving towards normalization of the relationship between both nations. The Russian top diplomat also praised the U.S. president's statements about NATO's expansion being the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine.
President Trump, when it comes to statements, has mentioned NATO expansion. He is the first, and so far, in my opinion, the only Western leader who has publicly and loudly said that one of the root causes of the Ukrainian situation was the previous administration's pushy line of pulling Ukraine into NATO. None of the Western leaders has ever said this, and he has made this point several times. This is already a signal that he understands our position.
Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, postponed his visit to Saudi Arabia to avoid legitimizing the U.S.-Russia meeting. The president declared that negotiations between the United States and Russia in Saudi Arabia were a surprise for his country. At a press conference with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara, he said that he had postponed the trip to avoid coincidences. Zelensky informed that they have contacted the Saudi authorities to inform them of the change of plans and that they had agreed to hold the meeting on March 10th. Moving on to other topics, in the United States, a fire broke out at a Pennsylvania aerospace factory in the state of Philadelphia, forcing schools to close and residents to stay indoors. According to the Abington police chief, the fire broke out around 9:35 p.m. and in the morning it began to flare up with heavy smoke. Through a press release, the authorities of the municipality of Abington informed that the building was evacuated with no injured reported so far. They also noted that as smoke and particles from the fire spread through the area, residents and merchants around the factory were evacuated. And the French Parliament was scheduled to vote on Wednesday on a sixth motion of no confidence presented by the Socialist Party against Prime Minister François Bayrou. The motion's approval requires the support of at least 289 of the 577 deputies of the Assembly. So far, Bayrou has gone through 5 motions this year, most of them linked to the state budget. The motion involves a scandal for sexual abuse and physical mistreatment at the Catholic College of Bethlehem when he was an education minister. However, analysts consider unlikely that the motion can reach the needed majority to be approved. And Germany witnessed the last debate between the country's 4 chancellors candidates in the run-up to the federal election on February 23, 2025. During the face-off, the candidates discussed the nation's economic crisis and migration policy, as well as its relations with Ukraine and Russia, amid public rejection of German right-wing extremist parties. According to surveys conducted after the debates, Social Democrat and Conservative candidate Friedrich Merz leads the voting intention, followed by the sitting chancellor and candidate Olaf Scholz. More than 59 million voters will go to the polls this Sunday to elect the next representatives of the national parliament, who in turn will select the country's chancellor. Moving now to the world of culture, in Russia, Moscow Kremlin museums signed a cooperation agreement with TV Bricks. This agreement marks the beginning of a new stage from the Kremlin, which started in 2025 with an exhibition of Russian art in Beijing and simultaneous exhibitions in the center of Moscow. Collaborations will focus on strengthening international ties in humanitarian and informational areas, highlighting Russia's cultural and artistic richness. The agreement between these two institutions represents a significant step towards the expansion of the Kremlin's international presence. And the Carnival of Venice 2025 kicked off with colorful comparsas and big parades in this Italian city. For 10 days, thousands of tourists and locals participate in the event with costumes and tours through the streets with Venetian masks, symbols of the carnival, which allow attendees to immerse themselves in the mystery of the festival along with the Baroque-style costumes. The event is one of the country's major tourist attractions, welcoming every year thousands of people from all over the world who enjoy music, lights, and street shows. This year's edition commemorates the 300th anniversary of the birth of the adventurer Giacomo Casanova, with thematic activities inspired by his legacy. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and also on TikTok. For teleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.